you, Mr. Lord, for such a great speech. It was indeed an informative sharing. Following the trend of developing AI, the discussion about whether AI is an angel or a devil has been brought to the table. However, the real question is how we all can build technology design in a way that augments humans' ingenuity, human-centered, and guided by principles that are core to human rights. How can we make sure we're using the machines, not the other way around?
Our next speaker, Mr. Verlebie Chen, a software developer and engineer from Microsoft, will bring us a topic of a guide to responsible AI for developers. She will cover a topic about how we can use different tools in our next open source project to build inclusive technologies. We also have the privilege of being sponsored by Microsoft. Thank you so much for the kind endorsement for this event. Now, may I pass my time to Ms. Chen, please?
I'm going to talk a little bit about responsible AI. But before that, I want to show you a few images. And maybe you can think about what's the commonality of these images and what's the key theme of today. The first image. The second one is about lately the news about Mexico and leading the war. Criminals and non-criminals. And also about other, maybe you're familiar with these boxes about image recognition and facial recognition. So maybe something will pop up in your mind about how we use technology nowadays. And I guess it's no stranger to all of us about these boxes and about these facial recognitions. Is indeed very common in our daily lives now. So one thing that I want to bring up is, from all of these technology, all of these implications, it is also important for us to understand where we are going for next. And sometimes we spend time to argue whether AI sometimes is good or is bad. There are a lot of arguments also around how people use it or misuse it, and whether it eliminates people's jobs or replace our productivities, replace people's career. There are a lot of controversial arguments around this. And I want to share today's topic because also in this conference, the theme is stay safe. When we talk about safety and security, it's not only about we being safe at home, sound at home from the virus, but also with our behavior online and with all of these technology. So we also have previously sections about AI, briefly in demos. But this time I want to take it in from another perspective. So talk about how we can bring the conversations into another level to create a better future for next generation with these technology and use them reasonably. So before we start, I want to go through some background to provide you some context of what type of AI that we're talking about. So these are some different products and services that Microsoft provide. So we have Azure AI and M365 AI and M365. So maybe some of you are familiar with these technologies. Then, also for our AI platforms, when you're developers, you should be very familiar with our AI services. We provide the most comprehensive set of AI services for any developers. Even your company or your team, we have a lot of pre-built AI services with services. We also have a lot of infrastructure as a service Say, for example, we have data or compute that is going to build their own solutions. So of course, we also have tools like Visual Studio tools. I think everyone's very familiar with, and also a lot of machine learning tools that we recently pushed and update. So these are different services that we have on our platforms. But yeah, I mean, these are something that we used probably for our next project. But then when we are trying to build the next project, and as I've mentioned, and also you see a lot of cases, stories, that how are we going to make sure the whole process is we're building for everyone, is inclusive, is fair, and is building for a better future, but not a worse version of us. So there are a lot of ethical challenges, I would say, and I assume everyone should, think about it. And some stories may pop up in your mind as well. And when we talk about ethical challenges or responsible AI or AI ethics, these are very broad concepts and abstract. Say, how do we want to make sure? How do we ensure we have the same standard to everyone, right? So from Microsoft's point of view, we try to build 6 ethical values to guide the cross-disciplinary development and the use of AI. So these are the 6 different elements and principles that we try to ensure in our projects, product development, and in all of our engagement with customers. Especially, we also want to provide these standard to also developers who contribute to our projects to make sure we have these values in mind when we try to build the entire project. So you see there are 6 of those values. While we articulating and agreeing on these principles is important, it's actually just a starting point. So it's a beginning for us to think about what we can do in this area. These 6 values are not the end, or I would say like a hard standard, but it's something for us to think about and guide us through the journey. Okay, so I will go through each of them later on, but then for now, I hope you have some idea of what type of what's responsible AI and what I'm trying to talk about, and what kind of ethical challenges we want to tackle or mitigate. And these 6 principles are provided by Microsoft for everyone to think about in their project creation or build or deployment, or even think of next project or next innovations to mitigate all the risk. Then I want to share with you some examples from myself about how we try to implement some governance or monitoring policies in reality in such a big organization, and to let you have a feeling of how much we're investing into handling these kind of topics and to make sure everyone is compliant with these values. So here is a sensitive use case flow that my organization has lately implemented. It's actually quite new. I'm not too sure about if you have similar process in your team or project. But I mean, if you're doing your own project or starting your own business, it may be something you can consider. So first of all, you can see me myself on as an employee. And say if we have a project we want to do with a customer, we'll first check, whether it requires review or not. So there are a few high risk data that we want to make sure we handle them correctly and in a better way. So say, for example, if we have data related to face recognition or health data, or try to prevent or try to predict whether someone will commit crime or not, or try to prevent someone to get access to some services, like getting some grant or getting some funding. So these are some
data that we want to be very careful, and these are sensitive use of data. So afterwards, we'll go through that part of report and we'll go through the guide. And say, for example, if I realize that it's a health case, or there was once a case that we use data to maybe train a chatbot that to provide some advice to child abused kids, who childhood's being abused. So these are very sensitive data, and we want to make sure, also the chatbot is providing a correct and positive feedback instead of making it worse. So in that case, we're going through these review, and we'll go through a long list of triage requirements. So as you can see, I won't go through in details, but I just want to capture a few section for you to have a look and feel to understand, it's actually, a pretty comprehensive assessment of how we are going to handle these data, how we are going to make sure we have positive interactions with our users. Say, for example, how to be prepared to roll back the system if anything's happened. And always we want to emphasize it's important for people, especially for the business user or the decision makers, to be in the loop. It's very important to make sure we have humans interference in the process, so that when things happens, in the wrong direction, we can put a stop or handle it immediately. So after the triage, say if it's still a very sensitive case, say we always try to avoid, for example, a machine learning model to predict whether you got cancer or not. We try to avoid to saying yes or no, but we try to assist a doctor's decision. In that case, because it's also very sensitive, so we'll go through, the third section of it, like advise or decide part of it, where you can see our CEO Satya's face there. I want to also emphasize it's a huge investment that we put into this area, but it also takes a lot of time, but we think it's important for us to go through all of these. Okay, so now I'm going to go through each of the principles very quickly. I think it's not a new concept. So I'm pretty sure you have similar cases or read them, on news or internet. But I just want to make sure that, we revisit these principles and we know it's important to our next project when we try to, say, for example, machine learning projects, or when we try to implement some kind of predictions. We want to make sure everyone's are treated equally. So first, I will start with fairness. So fairness is something that we want to make sure everyone will receive the same services or user experience from the system. So we don't want to exclude anyone from the system. This is something, a case that has been a while, that Amazon's having same-day delivery exclude the zip codes from majority of African Americans cities. So you can see from there, they're trying to target where most of maybe the consumer sits in those cities. So that's why they try to prioritize that cities, which is something that we want to think about it carefully when we're trying to implement some system. Another part is fairness also about, Compass is a famous case that US used it to assess different risk of whether a person will recommit crime again. So based on their prior offenses, their current offense, they're trying to measure the risk, whether that person will recommit again or not. And from the photo, you can see, like, say, that lady, because it's probably lady in black, she got higher risk. But when you look into the offense, it's just taking a bite on a spoon without permission. So sometimes I will say it may be accurate, but sometimes you may pose more threat than benefits, and especially in committing crime or not, this is a very sensitive areas, and it has a lot of gray areas that people will, even lawyers need to um, debate about. So that's why this is something we want to be very careful when we handle the next project. Then we have reliability. So it is designed to perform safety. So we want to make sure our system will perform greatly, even in worst case scenario. So I think there's a very famous case about Tay, the social bot on Twitter, who has a very racist comments after 24 hours on live when people comments pretty wrongly and had a very wrong conversation with this bot. And then after 24 hours, Microsoft decided to take it off. So you can see it turns to, from a pretty sweet and optimistic entity to a pretty bad racist bot after 24 hours. And that's in 2016. Okay, so I think it's kind of understandable. I mean, it won't be very new to everyone about reliability. The next part is privacy and security. I think to all the developers, it's something very familiar, because in your daily project, I assume you also got a lot of questions about security and privacy. So I won't deep dive into it. Some of the government regulations lately also implemented, GDPR to make sure everyone's have a standard and meet the standard in all their users for all the users in the internet. So their AI system should actually respect the privacies of individuals like users. And from this privacy and security aspects, we want to make sure all the information is protected. And say we also have lately, I think, like Zoom issues about privacy and security. So it's a huge issue always in the topic, and it's part of the responsible AI. Then for inclusion. So inclusion means that, when you're doing your next project, it's not mentioning, you are purposely trying to exclude a part of the user, but then you may, unconsciously mistakenly, exclude a group of users in your next project. And for inclusion, it's important for us to understand the different perspective and different people. They may come from different countries, backgrounds. It's important to have them involved. So we want to provide them channels for feedback, and at least provide them a way to let us know, you're not doing right in that sense. So some questions you may think about in your next project, say for example, has this system being created in an exclusive manner to address some potential barriers that could unintentionally exclude people, for example? And does it work for people across a spectrum of ability? And it has a diverse set of stakeholders provided input on your projects. Maybe they can find out something different. So what I'm saying is we want to really avoid similar situation as this photos. But I'm confident that we won't make obvious mistakes. But I mean, it's always important for us to have a self-reflection on our next project. Then it's transparency. There are more research in transparency about AI system right now. And some cool example is, say we are trying to mitigate the gender bias. So previously we used the word de-bias, but then now we're trying to make clear we're just mitigating the bias in gender in the data set and the models. So you can see from the photos that women are more likely to correlate it with the word cooking and not men. That's from the data set provided by the COCO data set. That's from a lot of news clips. It's not a manual made data set. It's actually all gathering all the news from previous years and get these results. So from one perspective, we can't change what's in the past, but from one perspective, we can think about how we can, mitigate these bias, and it has huge implications in a lot of systems. Say, if we want to use it to determine, whether I want to hire this person, maybe a man may have like disadvantage in applying the job. If it's, say, for example, a chef or cooking assistants, for instance. So these are something we want to be very careful about. Then the next one is accountability. So I want to demonstrate this because it's something I'm not that aware of. People are thinking, hey, it's because some company, say Facebook, built that algorithms, or YouTube did that algorithms. It's the one who built it. Or maybe, if you and I building it, is our responsibility. Yes, to one extent, but also not only to us. I think everyone who design and deploy it must be accountable, but at the same time, is everyone got a role to play in this manner. So one example is the Office of Responsible AI is a new office that created within Microsoft. We are still in pilot mode, but the idea is really trying to shape new laws, norms, and standards for everyone to advance responsible AI and try to do good to the society and try to questions about whether it's good or not, to the society. Then we have completed all the principles, but now I'm trying to end the principle or theory side with a story I want to tell everyone. So it starts from the concept of early cars. When people first built cars, you can see from the photos, this is the first car, and is not that comfortable as we have right now. You can also see it's built with sharp metals, and there's no like windshield, and all the dashboard is built in glass, literally glass, which means when it mesh, it's gonna hurt people and harm people. There's no collapsible steering columns, so it could frequently impel drivers. And afterwards, when you think about cars, so it's such a not non-convenient, not comfortable, uncomfortable innovations at first, right? Actually, there are a lot of accidents earlier, and car companies suppressed data to share the car accidents history. For a lot of people, they are urging for companies, hey, how about sharing with us which part is the most dangerous parts or harmful parts so we can improve it. But then back then, the companies, they didn't share. So only after a certain regulations has been imposed, so they are required to share the information. And based on that information, we find out what's the fatal part. And from there, you also can tell that, right now we don't have a lot of regulations on cars. Back then, there wasn't any speed limit, traffic lights, windshield was made of glass, for example. So these are external factors, also including, say, for example, regulations or how to educate people about all the transportation system. So these are something that can also help to lower the accident rates. And only after people are, really looking into the accidents reports, they decided they need to urge for a better vehicle. And companies start to do research. Okay, let's see what kind of materials should we use, or how can we improve the vehicle? So there was a belief that cars were dangerous back then because of people driving them. We can't help with people who drive them, right? So it's all about your driver. Driver is dangerous. And only after a while we decided, actually, no, there is a factor of weather. There's a factor of pedestrian, traffic lights, other drivers. Is a system that we need to impose to regulate cars. And only after we discover which part is the most dangerous part by looking into the reports, we can, evolve from the earlier car to the car right now. So it's actually saving 18 million lives. And there is a very sad, statistic lately that women are 47% more likely than male to get injured. Not until 2011, that is 9 years ago, that a law has passed to ensure we have female dummies in the crash testing. So I would say you can see still the prototypical male in the crash testing, how bias is conceived in this message, and it's important for us to still urge for improvement in vehicles. But at the same time, these stories makes me to reflect about how we think about AI system right now. We're in a very early stage to build a system or technology or solutions. We think that, hey, if that algorithms, that chatbots, or that model's got problem, the developers should fix it, or the companies are responsible. And yes, but then think about the cars. There are a few action items that people took back then, right? First is urging for transparency to see the accident reports. And second is imposing entire transportation's traffic system, like traffic lights, speed limits, better materials, seat belts on, for example. So these are something that we should think about how we want to regulate people when we do responsible AI. And we should always think about how to help each other or the new user, or educate them the proper use of AI. Just like how we want every new drivers to go through training, to go through license, to exams. These are very important. And I just also want to mention one point is everyone's got a part in this. I hope, at the end of this long conversation about values, principles, there's something you can take away and really think about what we can do, because we're in the early car stage right now. We're trying to build the entire transportation system now. Okay, so enough of the theory. I want to share some practical methodology. And you would probably recognize by looking at the research paper is they're very recent. Most of them are published last year. So it's a good time for us to, also share our opinions and change the system. So the first part is about transparency. How do we want to handle, different type of data? So, from different tech giants, we have proposed different methodology to make sure the data set is well documented. So there is a concept proposed by Microsoft named data sheets. Is very similar to how we want to put data sheets into, electronic components. To talk about the scripts' operating details, test results, like how to use it or not to use it, what you need to be cautious about. So it's also very similar to, people now put nutrition labels on food. Is the same idea. So we want to propose, a data sheets to mention how we want to maintain the data set, how data is being collected and created, and what's the legal and ethical consideration when you use it. It's not only for Microsoft. I mean, for Google, they have a model cards or data cards. For IBM, they have similar name like fact sheets. So it's actually is the same concept and idea, but then they want to promote documenting all the data sets. So the next part is about XAI, or interpretable machine learning. So it's also named responsible machine learning. So there's a model named Lime. It's also on GitHub. You can search about it. It's about understanding how to explain the model. And say, for example, if you're doing a predictions, what kind of features have you used, and is there any disparity? If it's an image, it's trying to explain the image recognition process. By providing the transparency, there's no right or wrong, but the idea is really letting you to understand what's under the hood. There's also other open source tools like Interpret, also Fair Learn. So there's one tool named Fair Learn on GitHub. It's really recruiting for contributors. You can feel free to contribute, but it's also a very nice model to let you to implement and provide you some advice on how to improve your projects and how to make sure it's fair and mitigate the potential risk. Here you can also see there's another tools for you to understand, the NLP process of it, and allowing you to, do some real-time typing and see how does it work, how this model works. These are not, I would like to say again, is not the right or wrong answer, or is not a solution to the problem, but is highlighting, the potential threat and risk, and providing users some potential, or providing the user the black box, what's inside the black box. Then for inclusion, so as you can see, this is an audit report. So what we're trying to propose is an actionable auditing, which allows a lot of companies to do to share their API results across different companies, across different say skin color or genders, and to make sure they have a right a performance. So we tried it once to send this report back to the companies and to urge for improvements, and we found out they did improve. So it's something very similar to what we're doing auditing right now in finance, but then it's auditing across AI solutions and products. Okay, so I know it's a little bit overrun, but I want to end by a very quick case studies. So it's about machine learning in criminals. So this approach is by two researchers from China in 2016, and they claim they got 90% of accuracy by judging people whether they will commit crimes or not by looking at their face, like literally. So these are free samples in criminal ID and non-criminal IDs. So as you can see from the photos, some of them looks, like more criminal according to the research, and they predict higher risk of committing crime for next from the research. So have you figured out some commonality in all three photos? Did you sense something wrong? Okay. So from my common sense, if you say, for example, tell your friends, hey, I can judge whether a person will commit crime or not by looking at their face and get 90% accuracy. I mean, that isn't something that quite fit my common sense, at least. But yeah, I mean, this is a research paper, so people actually look into it, how and why. So there's a few things I want to highlight. So look at the data set. So you can see most of them are from random corporate headshots, and some of them are from criminals and violent photos. So according to the research paper, how they're going to predict is based on these algorithms, D, theta, and P. So which means that if you have shorter distance D between your inner corner of eyes and a larger angle of theta and including your P, then you're likely to commit crimes. So maybe time to look at the mirror and check on yourself. But yeah, it's actually not, it's actually something that about confirmation bias. As you can also see, that's because of the data set. Most of the data set that been used to train this machine learning model is from a corporate headshots. And only part of them are from criminals. So the proportion is not correct. And look at these algorithms. Does it remind you of something? It's actually, when you have that D, theta, and P, it's just someone who is smiling. So when you think about criminal and non-criminal, criminal is simply saying, hey, whether someone is smiling or not. That's because most of the data set is from corporate headshots. So when you go to a first day to your job, you're definitely smiling. And some of them, if it's criminal, you're getting a criminal headshot, which means it's in a police office, and you're probably not smiling, most of them, because you're being arrested. So people try to argue with the researchers about the results, and they use the same photos as follow, but just to change the curve of the smile and their faces, and you get different results. So it kind of proved that it's not only, statistic to prove it's wrong, but some common sense or, some little experiment or, maybe someone from the criminal or police office can provide the third-party opinion. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. But before we say goodbye, I want to have a few questions for you. So I want to ask, did you experience any shift in your thinking today around your next project? When you do next project in open source machine learning, will you consider to use some of the framework that I mentioned today? Will you think about some of the stories that I shared today? What's one concrete actions you will take up to apply what you have learned today? Is it something that you will try to question about the data set you used? Is it something you want to address when you create your next project on GitHub saying, hey, we have considered the following as responsible AI? And become an ambassador to ask people's projects, hey, have you considered the ethical implications? So before I end, I hope everyone enjoyed today's talk. You can find more information on Microsoft Source newsletter. Yeah, we have a YouTube channel, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. And if you want to learn more about responsible AI or, let your team or your developers to know a bit more about it, you can go to our Microsoft Learn. There are 2 paths that is about responsible AI. And also listed a few links and research papers that I used in this talk and blogs about, what's the principles and also a few GitHub repos that you can directly use and plug it in your next machine learning project. Okay, so that's all for my presentation. Thank you. Oh, we have one Q&A question. Question is, given the easiest way of getting ANNs with bias is with data sets that do not fully represent the real world, what's the best way of getting better data sets? Oh, it's a very good question. Thank you. So I think it is actually quite complex. You need to think about getting the data set that's from a very reliable source, but at the same time, you want to do it with, data set that's not quite readily available. So some things that you can use to benchmark your fairness or your disparity level, or whether it's fully representing your audience. So there's some testing you can do. Say, I also suggested the fair learn that you can implement in your model. Another part is when you're thinking about this, it highly depends on your context, what type of AI models you want to do, and, with that data set, what type of, which industry model or domain are you talking about? But in general, there are also different ways for you to mitigate the risk. And it's not only about the data set as well, but if you're talking about the data set, there's also some way like you can do maybe third-party auditing or third-party review of the data set to see whether it's complying all the concept or not. Another part is, also listed in the report, there is a research paper about, fairness and machine learning tutorial that you can go through it and go see if that's something would help. Definitely, there's also new paper about how to exactly measure your model's fairness. It's a very deep conversation because one time you try to make it quite explainable or transparent, but at the same time, it must have, a certain level of unexplainable. So you need to deal with, a trade-off between whether you understand it interpretable or its completeness. And to one extent, like you can always make up, reasons about how to explain that model, right? So is it unethical to make up a reason or make up explanations just to better sell the model? It's also another level of conversation. So yeah, I hope I won't be able to provide you exact answers. Just like what we did in Microsoft, we don't have like a solution. We have guidance and advice, but also we have some questions that let the business user or customers to think about. So I guess there are different ways that you can handle it, including source, including talking to the users, including from all kind of machine learning measurements, and also including trying to have third party to triage it. So these are some measures that I think you can try on. Okay, so no, okay, no more questions. Then I will end my session here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen, for your thoughts on on those grateful topic. Time flies and it marks the end of the morning session of the Open Source Conference. Thank you for all your attention and patience for our honorable speakers. Also, feel free to approach the speakers online if you have further questions on the topic discussed. Right now, it will be around 30 minutes short break. We would really appreciate if you can come back at 2 o'clock to join our afternoon sessions. Please remember to fill in the online survey in order to participate in the lucky draw. See you later.